welcome to Public Works General Services Meeting. It is August 23rd. I have Mr. Gookin with me, Miss Miller here, and I'm back. First up, Renata has some interesting technical difficulty that she needs help with.
Yes, I kind of put this under a housekeeping matter. We do have a current franchise ordinance / agreement with Mobilite or Mobility. Thank you. I keep wanting to call them Mobilite. Mobility. Their franchise agreement says that any assignment or transfer or even partial ownership needs to come back to council for approval. So at this point, they have requested a recapitalization transaction, which seems like they're entering into another company to help reorganize some of their debt, which also transfers some of their ownership, it appears. So this comes back to us to give our initial consent for them to even move forward with a closing statement type thing for their reorganization of debt, what they call the capitalization transaction. So the agreement says that it needs to come back to council for approval and that the consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. I don't know what that means, but I'm here to tell you that we have not had any encroachment permits pulled by this company yet. So we have the agreement, but they have not moved forward with any activity. Hope that helps.
Any questions? Mr. Gookin?
Thanks, Wood. So Renata, the section 8, the issue in question, number A says the franchise shall not be assigned or transferred. It has to come back to us. That's their language or that's our language?
That is the language that is in our agreement with them.
So do you know specifically what we're trying to prevent with that language? I mean, what was the concern?
I don't, other than sometimes transaction occurs behind the scenes and then we get like an insurance notice with another company name and we have no idea how to associate it back to this entity unless we have some paperwork pushing it back saying now this is now called BAI or whatever. I don't know. Legal's here. Mr. Gridley presented this originally if you want to weigh in on that one.
So, like a lot of our agreements, they live on and on and on, and I think this is language from franchise agreements from the past. I think, like Renata said, it is just designed so that somebody couldn't transfer it without our knowledge, without notice to us. I don't think we care about the entity so much until they start showing up in town on our right-of-way and doing work, and then we care.
Okay, so this is not, we're not trying to prevent anything sneaky, them doing something behind their back that would catch us. It's basically just an update. Here's your new name. We're good.
Right. And so, again, to some extent, we only care when they actually show up in town and start operating on city property and then start generating fees that should be paid to us.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Kiki, any questions?
No, this doesn't look like it really changes anything in the contract except for the names.
Correct.
So
All right. Hearing no other comments, look for a motion.
I'd make a motion to recommend consent to the transfer of control of Mobilite Inc. to BAI Communications for the purposes of the existing franchise agreement.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion, questions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yes,
I think consent calendar, there's not much mobile there.
yeah.
Guys are
We
good?
don't want to say mobility. One more time.
Mobility spelled wrong.
We'll put that on consent, please. Item number 2, welcome Bill Greenwood. Request for approval of assignment of a lease agreement with Nell and Ann Lunt, DBA Brooks Seaplane Service LLC to Shane Rogers, DBA Scenic Adventure Flights LLC. Sounds like a story.
Well, you know some of the tragic backstory about this. So the Lunts decided not to continue operating after the accident. And so they were able to find another person who would take over the operation, and that was Shane Rogers. It's, you know, gosh, it's been 18 months since the accident, 16 months, something like that. So he hasn't had done any operation off of this until we can get this thing solidified. So I told him early on that we needed to get all this in place. And it's been really great to work with, and she was just hoping to get this thing solidified sooner, but we had some difficulty getting some of the information we needed, insurances, that sort of thing. But we're there now, and we'd like to move forward with this.
Questions?
And just let me say this too, as an assignment to a lease, what it is, we did not rewrite the Luntz lease. What we did is allowed her to give an assignment of the lease. So she gave a letter that says that this current lease just carries over. We will renegotiate with Shane at the end, I think it's March of 23, something like that.
Kiki?
I just had a few questions, and we talked about this. As I recall, when this lease from Brooks Seaplane got transferred to the Luntz, I had some of the same concerns, and we talked about it. So I guess my thing is, I've been here a long time and remember the history of how Brooks Seaplane, it was the Brooks family and Bill and Grant
Right.
operated that.
Right.
It was kind of a novelty attraction to draw tourists here when it started. It was by appointment only, and it was kind of a, in my view, and I know this happened before you were even in the director's chair, but it was kind of a partnership with a unique attraction to draw tourists to enjoy the lake. And it was limited in scope. Their traffic patterns were pretty regular, and it was a small three-passenger, I think, 3 or maybe 5-passenger plane is all that had happened. I kind of had some questions the last time it was transferred, because the lease, as I recall, was asked to be renewed prior to its expiration date in order for the Brooks family to use it as an asset to sell their business to someone else. And I felt a little odd about that, in that it was a public lease, a public piece of property that was a lease that I didn't know if we had a precedent set in the community, in the city, where we actually allowed that to happen, and those leases were able to be transferred and sold as assets. But we moved forward with that. So I still have that kind of precedent-setting asset sale property question in my mind. Then the other thing is that I understand that the new lease operator isn't really going to be operating it in the same fashion that the Brooks family did. It's in its expanded form, larger passenger planes, sunset cruises. I'm just repeating from a newspaper article about what they're doing, flight schools and all of that. So my question would be that since the initial onset of the partnership of this program with Brooks Seaplane and the city of Coeur d'Alene, in a unique lease situation, times have changed dramatically. And, there's a lot more boat traffic, there's a lot more human traffic down on the waterfront there. And so I'm just wondering if council may want to discuss this in a little more detail rather than just moving forward with a lease transfer.
Well, I'm not certain if the paper got everything correct from Shane.
Okay.
Okay, my conversation with him was that he was really excited because he wants to continue that hometown feel. He really has a connection with that. He's a real, aviator buff. The flight school part of that is he's running that out of Hayden's Airport. In the lease with Brooks, initially with Grant and Bill, it allowed for them to do some flight school out of that site, as well as sell gasoline to other planes if necessary. It's been in that lease from day one. This lease has the same thing in it as well. So we just rolled that over pretty much, tightened it up a little bit with Randy's help, and then when the Luntz took it over, and then just changed the name. So the nuts and bolts of the agreement is pretty similar. But talking to Shane, he really wants to keep that touristy sort of family deal. He and his wife are running the thing. He's got another flight guy that he's working with, but it's just them. And so it's a very similar model that the Brooks had, I think.
Do you know whether the Brooks family ever executed or used any of that flight school portion of it?
I don't know, because they weren't, in the lease, they weren't required to tell us when they were doing it. They may have been doing it. And you know, when Grant was trying to shop the business before, there was a guy that asked about the flight school. So I looked into it at the time because he was thinking he wanted to have that as a piece of the component. And I said, well, it's in there. But I don't know whether Grant or Bill ever really utilized that piece of the lease. I don't know.
Okay. And I guess just reading through this, I just want to make sure that we aren't moving forward into some sort of expansion that is going to provide the citizens with something they didn't bargain for. So I don't know the deal. I haven't met this new owner or seen a
Right.
presentation or know what their plans are. I can read what the lease allows and see how, it's been transferred, and it doesn't look like that particular section of the dock ever comes up for anyone else to have a shot at utilizing it. There's kind of a permanent structure there now, and
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, we work these out with these folks because they have an investment, and
Right.
rather than just, sink all this capital into something and then the next year, all of a sudden it goes away. We like to let them, have a chance to make, a return on their investment. So if in fact they were ever to not want to continue, I would certainly consider doing something different there. So I've always got that in the back of my mind to get creative and maybe get some more revenue. And it's something I talked to Shane about as well. I'd like to see this continue to the end of its duration. And then I told him we're going to renegotiate the numbers, what I want to talk about.
And it's not, for me, like I said, it's been a fun asset for Coeur d'Alene for many years. It's kind of an iconic piece of our downtown. And so
Right.
it's just more that with these changes, I just feel like the lease doesn't say, like I say, I don't know. I thought I recalled reading in their article that they were planning on doing 8-passenger sunset flights, and that
And
was
what I'll do
never
is- yeah.
never a thing that Brooks Seaplane did. So I don't know if maybe
So
just some
what
more
I can do,
conversation
it's
about
unfortunate
what's
Shane's not
allowable.
here, that he might be able to address that. I'll reach out to him when
Yeah.
we're done and get some clarity on that. I don't know if we have in this lease whether or not it says hours of operation, but I know that Brooks always, they didn't fly after sunset. And his expanded operation, I don't know about that, but I just know that what he's explained to me, he's really excited about the history. He had all the dates and times and the owners before Brooks and had all of that information he was sharing with me and how he really wants to be part of the community. And I thought, well, that's cool. He's really wanting to become what's been the iconic, thing there on the docks for all these years.
I'm sure, and I'm sure they're great folks, and it's nothing that's personal. I just think it's time to, when you have this kind of a change, it's an opportunity to look at the details of what you're signing up for. And, I was just pondering, would we take the contract that's owned at the Harbor House, or that's in place right now at the Harbor House, and allow them to sell it to a vendor as part of a business, and then bring it back to us for a lease extension? So
In
I
their
was
lease,
just-
that's not a piece of the puzzle.
Well, that was just theoretical.
Yeah, I know, it's just
It's
theoretical, but I'm saying,
But we're
we
doing
do
something
control some of
unique
those. Right,
with this
right.
particular one, and I just feel like when there's a change, there's just an opportunity to look at it and make sure we're
Okay.
giving the public what they bargained
Sure.
for. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Anything?
No, what's your pleasure?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Couple. So kind of along some of the same lines. So if somebody came in with a big cruise boat and wanted to pick up people on the dock, they would have to wait for the end of a contract before they had an opportunity, or not
Are
necessarily?
you talking about another cruise boat company to come in there?
Sure.
No, that's, again, the cruise boats that are there existing have the opportunity to send us a letter to say we'd like to continue.
Right.
If they chose to not continue that operation, you bet, we would certainly shop that around and find another vendor.
Or they decided to sell it, we'd be back into this situation?
I'd have to pull up their particular agreement. It starts before my time, and I don't know how that's woven in there, whether or not, they would probably operate out of a different location, and so then dock space would just become available. I really highly doubt that organization, that corporation would sell their fleet,
Gotcha.
so they would just probably look at another place to moor.
Would that work same with the paddleboard boys that say, all of a sudden, well, we're gonna take this year off, but we don't want to give up our lease? We, the city, still get paid, but the service goes away
So here's an
for,
example of that happened with the other operation at Parasol. When Stan the Man Anderson, I think who was his
Right.
name, when he had that, he was trying to do that sort of deal where he was going to sell it to somebody else as part of that operation. It wasn't allowed. And Mr. Eastwood at the time said so. And so what happened was he sold his boat to someone else. We rebid that as a parasail opportunity. So if there's anybody else out there that's a parasail, they can certainly vie for that. And the Rodriguez's, who currently are there now, were able to get the bid there, or that request for proposals. And so that's the way it would roll.
Okay. So each individual lease is in its own world, its own unit, its own
Right.
rules, its own regs. Everything isn't consistent. I
No,
think that's what
they're
we were
mostly
questioning.
consistent except for this Brooks one. That's what I've found, is that was the only one that allowed for that to continue as part of an asset. The rest of them, it's really clear that you're not allowed to do that. And as well, you're not allowed to sublet. So that operation has to be what you bid it as. You can't turn around and sublet it. Now, if you chose to get creative and I guess and say that they're an employee or whatever and kind of fly under the radar, that's always a possibility. But it's really not allowed.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No,
I'm looking for a motion.
I would like to recommend that we table this to be moved forward to full council for discussion.
so in other words, just move it, you want it on the agenda?
The agenda?
Yes,
You could do that, Bill?
no decision.
Kind of prepare for these questions and
Sure, you
things?
bet, yeah,
From-
I'll be there.
You're good with that?
I'm good.
Okay.
So I'll look for a second.
Well, I'm sorry,
Oh,
second,
sorry.
then if that was the,
Then second.
so the mo-
Discussion. Bill, you're good?
Yes, what are
the
you?
motion is just to stick it
To
on the
move it
agenda.
to the agenda without recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
You could do that, please, Sherry? Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Oh, he's not done, though.
I'm not done, you're not done with me.
Uh-oh.
Wait, is it getting better?
Yes.
All right.
So this is a cleanup of our operational waters. We have a fireboat, we don't have a police boat. And we get,
Don't get any ideas.
yeah, don't even think about it, Dave. They want a jet
Police
ski.
paddleboard?
Yeah,
That makes more
let's keep with
sense.
a turret.
So, this year, for example, I've received numerous calls. People have been hooking our buoy line, our buoys that say no boat swim area, and people have been beaching,
Yes, they have.
putting their boats on city beach. On top of that, so we don't have any way to control that. We don't have somebody go out there and say, hey, here's how it goes. So the sheriff's department doesn't have jurisdiction within our waters, and which is 1,000 feet from the shore. So it allows this operation for them to help us with that, as well as we are in favor of the wake issue because of a new little park down the river called Atlas. And so we weighed in on our concerns about that as well. And that's what this addresses. And it's pretty clean and simple, just to let them help give us oversight on our jurisdictional waters.
Any questions?
No, it's just a comment. So it seems like, they want us to, or they want to be able to enforce the new wake zone in our little chunk of
Well, we
river.
agree with it, yes.
And we agree with that, but also this helps us too, because it will allow, when you see the guy who docks his boat on City Beach,
But we can call them
Someone
and it
can
can
go-
say, and in fact, the HOA Prez over there in your neighborhood, councilman, had called me and she said she had actually reached out to the county and they said that they couldn't do anything about it.
right, so let's fix it.
So this will fix that.
Perfect.
Nice. Any other comments? None. Look for a motion, please.
So I'd move to recommend the council approve the amendments to municipal code relating to the motor-driven watercraft speeds on navigable waters of the city.
Second.
Been moved and second. Any other comments? About, good. Let's put it on the agenda.
Yeah, it has to go, it's
Oh,
an
okay.
ordinance.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. What I bring to you is fairly short.
It's not a watercraft, is it?
It's not a watercraft, but
yeah.
it borders the water with North Idaho College.
Okay, all right.
What this is just basically a continuation of our ongoing agreement with North Idaho College. We are fairly unique that we are one of the only municipalities that has an SRO in a college environment, but that gives us a lot of payback, if you will, working with, some of these teens that are young adults there with some dating relationships and things that come out of that. We have a really tight working relationship in NIC with the faculty themselves and with Safe Passage, and we've been able to head some things off before they become an issue. There's really nothing substantive that has changed with this agreement. We've updated the numbers for cost of living and things of that nature. So really, that's the only change. I've met with Alex Harris, my counterpart at NIC, who does their Title VIII and security and all those types of things. He and the Vice President are in full support of this, and we would just request your support for this agreement moving forward.
Questions? Nope. Comments? With the hearing none, let's move on.
Well, I would move to recommend that council approve the agreement with North Idaho College, NIC, to provide a school resource officer, SRO, services for the school years 21-22 or 21-23?
Correct. It's a 2-year agreement.
Oh, it's a 2-year agreement. Okay, so
Yeah.
2021 and then 2023.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Consent, please. And finally, Michael, coming in from the legal department. You got a story for us, Mike?
We do, or I do, thank you. And although we have done this before, I noticed that several people in the audience have come back to hear it again. So
Awesome.
I think that just gives you a little preview of how exciting this
It's
is.
your charisma.
Yeah. As they slip out the back now. I'm Mike Gridley, your city attorney, and I'm here. I'm very proud of the department that I'm honored to be the head of, your legal department. Our mission statement is simple. We just try and do things high quality, low cost, and provide the arm of law enforcement that's the criminal prosecution for the city of Coeur d'Alene. We've got a great bunch of people. We have 4 lawyers and 7, or we have 10 employees total, 4 lawyers and 7 support staff. Wes has been here, Wes Somerton, our chief criminal deputy, has been here a little bit longer than I have. I've been here almost 20 years. Hard to believe, Woody, as time flies. Randy, of course, is one of the MVPs here in the city and does a great job with our civil work. Here's our 3 prosecutors. Ryan Hunter is most recent. He's a deputy city attorney, replaced Eileen McGovern, who went to become the
Judge.
city prosecutor in Post Falls.
Oh, I thought she's a judge. Which one became a judge?
That was Ann Eckhart.
Oh, okay.
She's a magistrate judge. Warren Wilson is now has been the city attorney in Post Falls for a number of years. So we spin off a lot of talent, but training, yeah, really good people. Our senior legal assistants, Shannon Breeze and Juanita Knight, did a superb job with everything. And Shell, Tammy, our legal assistants. Susan Kerner is actually a volunteer that works in our office and tries to fill in the gaps and does a lot of the contact with victims and witnesses. So here's kind of a long-winded summary of what we do. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and he said, wow, you guys are kind of like the liver for the city. You clean up all the bad stuff that comes through, and
Oh, I thought this was a pate joke.
no, I thought it was pretty clever. He goes, yeah, you're like the liver for the, and he said, you guys are probably getting cirrhosis about now. So anyway, civil office, you've got a $100 million corporation that you guys are the chief executives of, elected officials, and we're the legal staff for that. And then one of the most important functions, I think, of the city government is law enforcement, public safety. And we are the arm of law enforcement that works with PD, police department, the other arm, in enforcing and ultimately holding people accountable for the violations and crimes that are committed, the misdemeanors and infractions that are cited by police. Just wanted to touch on our the law enforcement arm, because that's a part of our office, our department, that really needs some help, I think. But some of the things, and I bring talked last time about, unless you're a victim of a crime, or unless somebody in your family, or you're a criminal, or you get called for jury duty, you probably don't know a whole lot about what goes on over in the courthouse. And that's where our guys are every day, handling cases in front of the magistrate judges primarily. There are now 10 magistrate judges that we're trying to juggle dockets for. And then behind the scenes, we have support staff that handles the paperwork and supports the going to court with the attorneys. So although some of these crimes, they're misdemeanors, obviously, but they're serious crimes that affect citizens in our community. And I know that the citizens who are injured or victims of these crimes want them prosecuted, drug crimes. So just to go quickly through what our support staff does, they're the ones that no one really sees, because they're the ones that are getting the paperwork together, getting witnesses contacted, following up with police department if there's not evidence or there's documents needing to go to court. And those of you who have been to court, you know it's an adversarial situation. And so if you walk in and with an allegation, you've got to be able to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Meantime, there's somebody on the other side, fighting to prove you wrong, to say, no, that's not right. One of the things we do, a typical motion that's filed in a criminal case is a motion to dismiss based on the officer not having probable cause for a stop. Our officer sees something that justifies stopping it, they file a motion to dismiss based on they didn't have probable cause to arrest or to stop. We come in and have to say, no, they did, and here's the proof. So that's kind of...
Those do you get agreed to? I mean, you say, you do the, whatever you just said, what that legal term was.
Probable cause.
Yeah, how many of those does the judge agree and say, yeah, you're right, it's a case dismissed?
Well, I think it's, number one, we very actively, support PD, our police department, in that. The video helps. I mean, if you come up and say, we've got the video from either the car or the officer, taillights out. Well, if it's picture right there, that's a pretty simple one, or the behavior of the car or driver driving the car. But yeah, it's something, again, it's an adversarial situation. It gets more complicated in a domestic violence or a battery or things like that. So, but yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of our prosecution office is they're held in high esteem, high regard by all the folks, the judges and the court staff. I think we set kind of the high bar for how things should be prosecuted and thoroughly handled.
Mike, I have a question if I could.
Okay.
So when you get to this situation where somebody is denying something, somewhere along the line, our guys have already said, yeah, this guy did it, no problem. Then the battle starts, right? At what point is everything worth the battle? Is there compromise along the way, or do you have to wait till the very end to say the jury goes not guilty or guilty?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It starts with law enforcement on the police side. They have discretion. They don't have to ticket or cite everybody they stop. You get a warning, don't speed again or whatever it is. Likewise, when it comes to our office, we can look at it's been charged, the citation's been issued, or sometimes we get a case to us for review. Would you review these facts and see if they justify charging a person? We'll look at that, and there are cases where we dismiss and we don't charge. Some of it is based, frankly, on caseload. If you have only so much capacity and you have crimes like domestic violence, battery, drug charges, something that are more higher priority, then there are other cases that will go, we just don't have the time. In that process, yes, you can have plea deals, plea agreements, plea arrangements. And we are not in the business of trying to put people in jail. I don't think that's productive for anybody, but there are people that, whatever time this is, they haven't gotten it in the first, second, third, whatever times they've been in front of or been involved in with law enforcement. Okay, we're pushing for, some time in jail. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a process where there are at times negotiations of a plea, if you plead to this. Ultimately, though, it comes down to holding people accountable for things they do, wrongs they do that harm the community, either individuals or businesses, theft, that kind of thing, property damage.
And along that same line, then, when it gets to that point, is it your guy's decision, or does it go to the judge?
Well, ultimately, the judge would bless it, but there would be a recommendation, a little bit like people coming to you with here's our recommendation, and you could say, no, we don't agree with that. But typically, if both sides agree to it, the court, they want to get rid of the case, move cases along too. So typically, they go along.
Thanks.
Yep. So our support staff are really heroes and work closely with, again, police and the court system, and then with victims, and trying to move things forward. And this is just more of a list of everything they do. But we're fortunate to have the experience we do. We have, I think, over 200 years of experience in the legal department, and they work very hard. They're very dedicated. I asked staff to provide me with a 1 or 2 sentence job description in preparation for some of this, and for this presentation. And I was impressed by how many of them used the word integrity and passion for what they do, and so they really care about trying to keep the community safe, hold people accountable. This is more, and I bring this up, the recorded media, it's a good thing, bad thing. Now that we have video cameras that record a lot of activity, it does make it, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so if you say, that wasn't me, and we've got pictures of, but getting all that together and providing it to defense counsel, redacting the pieces that are going to go to court. So if you have multiple officers show up in a situation, they may all have their cameras going, and then we've got to sort through that, provide it all, a lot of editing. So that is a big, to be honest, big time suck, because it takes a lot of time to go through that. So. And, with our prosecutors, I wanted to highlight what their caseload is. And this slide shows their current active cases, their court appearance. And the numbers, when I got these from Wes and from prosecution's office, are just kind of mind-boggling. But this is the number of cases that they handle. And there are some recommended standards for how many cases an attorney should handle in a given year, a prosecutor. There are national recommendations not to exceed 400 cases, misdemeanor cases. Our lawyers currently handling double that. Now, some of our cases are infractions, obviously, but it's still, our guys are running hard and have been doing so. As the city grows and more demand is put on them. So, just
Mike, can I just ask a question on that
Yep.
side real quick? So the misdemeanor case loads at 400, and then 820 cases is infractions and misdemeanors. I'm guessing from what you're saying here is that a lot of the infractions are the ones that are determined to just be, once they're reviewed, to just not be pursued. in any way because they can't handle that many So who makes that decision, and is there a criteria that they say, or is that just your prosecuting attorney's lead job to say, I'm gonna go through these, this is how much staff we have, we're gonna pursue these misdemeanors, but these infractions based on this are not going to be pursued at all, and they're just, what happens to them? They just are dismissed completely?
Right,
Just
right.
tell me if my words were in the proper order.
Yeah, and it could be a misdemeanor as well. With any given case, you're going to look at, do you have the facts, do you have the evidence to go forward and get a conviction? If, for whatever reason, the witness doesn't want to cooperate, the victim doesn't want to cooperate, there's some problems with the evidence, the video cameras don't really match up with what we're charging, the reports don't match up. You know, if there are,
So each attorney gets assigned misdemeanors and infractions, and then each attorney makes the decision as to whether it's worth pursuing.
yeah, and there's a hierarchy. You know, Wes Summerton is our chief prosecutor. Ryan Hunter is a deputy, so he's a more experienced prosecutor. And then beneath him, we have Kyle and Matthew, who are relatively new, so that's kind of the chain of command. They work as a team reviewing things, and a lot of times they'll be handling, although they have dockets assigned to them, like A through D belongs to one of them, E through H or whatever. They divide up the alphabet based on the defendant's last name. But those cases also get, different lawyers cover different dockets at times. Ultimately, it is a team effort. They have the discretion to dismiss cases, and that would ultimately reside with Wes, I think, but because it is, everybody wants to do the right thing.
Okay. Gotcha.
But big numbers, it's kind of staggering. So going back in time, and this I just pulled up going back to 2005. You know, council has supported public safety, law enforcement, and have increased. You know, meantime, our budget has stayed relatively flat or decreased. We have asked for help in the past, but we haven't really gotten it. And I think the criminal office needs help primarily because of the number of cases, but then also all the media that goes with it, all the video that goes with it. We've got to handle. And then, you know, as far as employees, we've actually gone down in the number of employees from 2013, 2014. We had 13 and a half. We have 10 now. And meantime, the other arm, law enforcement, police, has increased to 120. So there's, and that's, I'm sure council has done that in response to demand from the citizens. But I just want to reiterate that we're the arm that ultimately holds people accountable, takes it to court. The tickets aren't worth much if you don't prosecute them. And your currently proposed budget, we have increases with police department, and we've had requests, and at this time there's nothing proposed for legal. These are the two positions that we really would like to fill and have a need for, as assistant city attorney and then a legal assistant. If there was, we can't do anything, but a legal assistant would help a lot. So threw these in as kind of rhetorical questions, but I think the questions we're going to have to answer. How does the city enforce laws without adequate prosecution? Again, if you can write all the tickets in the world, but if you know they're not going to get prosecuted, are you going to change any behavior with the citing? You know, we're adding more police officers, but not adding prosecution staff. And I think that the fundamental question is, if there are more courts, more people, more police, more evidence, and more calls for law enforcement, then why are we not providing more prosecution staff? And then ultimately, I think we'll be, and it's kind of Councilmember Miller's question, making decisions on what is the priority of crimes to be prosecuted or not, given we've got so many people to cover so many cases in so many courtrooms, and which ones are we just going to have to leave behind? So this is what we would request is support in this budget to staff our prosecutor's office with more folks. And I would be glad to answer any of your questions.
Mike, I have a question in regards to the relationship of law enforcement to prosecution. Do you do a comparison with like what Post Falls does, or how the sheriffs work? So many, their numbers same as what you just showed us. Do you guys ever talk to each other, compare notes and things?
Yeah, yes, we look at things like that. A lot of it is really a qualitative, not necessarily a quantitative. So you can say, well, they had 100
Right.
cases and they've got one lawyer, or they got 300 cases and they go. It gets down to how you want to handle the cases. And so one of the examples that has been cited to me that there are jurisdictions where if you get stopped for DUI, if you'll plead to distracted driving or reckless driving, you won't get a DUI. So, okay, who really cares about that? Well, until the second time that person who should have gotten some punishment for a DUI, hits somebody, runs over somebody, does something while intoxicated. I think that's again where it's hard to say, qualitatively, if you had, prosecuted that guy on the first DUI, then maybe things would be different. If you say, well, we don't have the people to provide the quality for that prosecution, then bad things can happen. But your question is a fair question. We've gotten in the past, well, how many people does Nampa have? How many people does Pocatello have? How many people this and that? I think it's really hard to compare apples and oranges, or to find an apple to really compare with. And even with Post Falls, I think we're all struggling with keeping up with the number of people moving here. With misdemeanors, too, you're entitled to a public defender. And so that always ups the game, and which is provided free of charge, basically. And so if you get charged with a misdemeanor, you get a lawyer who's got to do their best to defend you. Well, we've got to do our best to prosecute and kind of defend our police department in the actions they took. So it's a tough situation. I know many departments are facing the same challenges, but ours is real, and so.
Any other questions? Keith?
Just, I had two things. In looking, when you said apples to apples, it's hard to compare. When you put together, or do you put together any type of analysis that says, we're looking at prosecuting open container infraction. Is that an infraction?
It's infraction, yeah.
And Post Falls doesn't have an open container code.
Mm-hmm.
So do you ever go through some of those and say, maybe we should make recommendations to amend some of these things, because we obviously still have to look at the open container infraction, which takes time, whether we dismiss it or not.
Right.
Is that a process that you go through and take a look at code recommendations to alleviate some of the things that maybe aren't working? And my other piece of the question, is there new types of misdemeanors and infractions that we haven't seen in the past that are starting to come into your, and my trigger for there was Coeur d'Alene has a short-term rental ordinance that we have talked about that other cities don't have. And so that's a new potential violation avenue that I'm wondering if those two things come into the analysis of what your workload is and how some internal changes could be made to alleviate that.
Yeah, and that's a good question. The second part is I'm not aware of a substantial number of new laws that are causing the problem, but short-term rental, any other type of code enforcement actions as we grow as a city. I don't think we've done an analysis like you're suggesting. Typically, we respond to complaints, whether it's civil, hey, how about changing this ordinance? It usually comes from a department or council saying, hey, could you look at this? I think that's a good example of, are there things on the books that are being cited, open container, that we don't want to criminalize anymore? And that's a tough one. I think, again, it's we don't want to go too far with anything like that until we get direction from council that,
Right.
hey, we want to look at changing this law, or hey, we want to eliminate this law.
Okay.
But certainly, that's a discussion we could have and probably will need to have if we get to a point where it's like we got enough staff to prosecute 80 cases, we got 100, which ones are not a priority to council and the community?
That's it.
Mr. Gookin.
Sure. So Mike, as a city attorney, you represent the city. So if someone decided, I didn't like the way Gookin voted on that thing, I'm going to sue him, you represent me, because that was an action that was taken by the city.
Yeah.
But
our
if I wanted
office-
you to do my will, no.
Well, number one, you wouldn't want me to do that. And number two, no, we work closely with staff and citizens. We get calls from citizens. We try to help them out. Yeah, we don't do legal services for individual council members or staff, but we try and steer them, in a direction that would be helpful.
Okay. Well, it's a question that comes up, and I know you get this a lot because people think this is free legal advice. And so they contact you and it's like, hey, is it okay that blah, 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 and you
Yeah.
must have a form letter you send out that says, we don't give free legal advice. We represent the city.
Yes, and Juanita, who's not here today, Juanita Knight in my office, she fields a lot of the calls, and she's really good about being patient with people and telling them about legal aid, or there are some community services for people, and just explaining. We were talking about the dodgeball
Yeah.
person, and explaining kind of how the system works. And you want public records? Well, here's Renata's contact, the clerk's office, and so there's a fair amount of that. We try and be customer friendly or do right.
In addition to going after the bad guys, you also serve as, there's a lot of law that has to come through that we make requests for.
Right.
And I know, for example, we had someone show up at council, quite often they do, but recently regarding this thing up on Fifth Street with the people who are squatting in the garage, and made a suggestion and said, what about modifying your code? So I know that one's in the hopper, but you have a lot of other stuff in the hopper, like the sign ordinance needs to be updated. I think we were going to do a massage parlor ordinance or something like that. So where's all this stuff churn in the bin? How does it, I know there's probably like classification of things that's like, I need to address this right away. And then there's other stuff that's like, it's been going on a while. So how do you prioritize? Is it when we squeal really loud or?
Yeah, I think it's like the people that come to you, the squeaky wheel sometimes gets greased. But, with all due respect, we'll talk to individually, any of you.
Right.
But one council member, if Woody said, hey, I think we ought to regulate, spaceships landing on the moon, it's like, okay, well, if you get 3 other council members who think that's a great idea, we'll get after it. But one individual idea, we'll talk about it. One of the functions that we serve, any lawyer serves, is kind of telling their client, no, you can't do that, or that's not a good idea. And the homeless, the squatting, some of those issues, they're challenging issues that Boise and some larger cities are seeing, and there's a lot of constitutional protection for just being poor and sleeping on public property. So it's something where we recognize there's a desire on council's part, on behalf of the people you represent, to take some actions, but sometimes we have to say, let's work on that. And but usually it's a priority determined by the majority of council and the mayor to say, this is something we want you to put your time on. Other stuff gets.
And then occasionally something rises up, like with our signs, so we have the political sign thing. And that, I think it was Mr. Grimm, who was running for sheriff at the time, comes up to us and says, hey, this is illegal based on that. And we're like, oh my gosh, is it? And we find out it is. And so it's like, we change it.
Yeah, and that's part of our job too. I mean, it's, there are laws on the books that have been there for a long time. And as courts interpret similar laws, sometimes that changes, and it comes up, and we try and move quickly when there's something that needs to be changed. Our goal is to keep the city out of trouble.
Yeah.
Liver processing all the bad stuff coming through, and it's not all bad stuff. A lot, it's good stuff. We get to work with good people, and there's a lot of projects. In the 20 years I've been here, I was driving up Northwest Boulevard the other day, and starting from this building here, Woody, you remember, all the way up McEwen and skateboard park and the trails and the wastewater and now Atlas, Riverstone.
I think
It's been a good
sometimes
ride.
we forget that how much time it would have taken out of this office to just negotiate the agreement with the BLM for the property and with the railroads
Yeah.
for the property that we got. And that doesn't have anything to do with caseloads at all. That's just, right? I mean, that's just a huge amount
Right.
of legal time to try to put something together for the benefit of the city citizens is kind of unfathomable how much time that would take to deal with railroads and bureaus of land management. That's huge.
Yeah, and all your work you did on acquiring the railroad, which is kind of step one to doing Atlas Park. That started with you saying, hey, we can do something here.
That's why our railroad.
That's why we hired him.
But you guys, yeah.
Years, decades later, we
Yeah,
finally did.
it only took 20 years.
But that all highlights the support, and you guys are the ones that come up with the ideas and support them. And that's why our community, I think, is so popular, and so many good things have happened. But anyway, thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank
That
you.
was good. Another perspective we never hear about, huh?
Nope.
I'll
Just
look for
happens.
adjournment.
Motion adjourned.
Second?
Been moved second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Sherry.